Good day, everyone. I am Pia Elaine Mariano from Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, major in Financial Management. So today, I will do the basic accounting tutorial using T accounts and on how it works using its equation. But before I start, let me first read the learning objectives in this topic. At the end of this discussion, you should be able to know the basic accounting equation, the T account, double entry system, normal balances of accounts, and recording transaction using T accounts. The accounting equation builds the foundation for all accounting system. It seeks to explain the relationship between the assets constituting a business and the funds that have been used to finance their purchase. The accounting equation ensures that the balance sheet remains balanced. Also, it is the representation of how these three important elements are associated with each other. These are the asset, liability, and owner's equity. When we say asset are things of value owned by a business. Kumbaga, asset represents the valuable resources controlled by the company, na kung saan ang liability at owner's equity represents how the asset of a company finance. When we say liability naman, liability are debts that the company owes and costs that it needs to be paid in order to keep the company running. Dito nakapaloob yung mga debts that need to be paid whether it is a long-term loan or bill. Maaari din naman na dito nakapaloob yung mga naging utang na kinakailangan talagang bayaran, gaya na lang ng equipments, supplies, rent expense, and the dividends payable. While in owner's equity, it is the amount of money invested by the owner in the business minus any amount taken out by the owner of the business. Owner's equity is one of the most important part in balance sheet because it helps to evaluate the company's finances. Maaari din naman natin na ma-compare yung owner's equity from one period to another para malaman natin if the company are gaining or losing value. When we talk about equity, there are four elements that affects itself. These are the capital, withdrawals, revenue, and expenses. When we say capital is the total amount invested in the business by the owner. When we say withdrawals occurs when funds are removed from an account. When we say revenue, it is the total amount of money brought in by a company's operation measured over a set amount of time. And when we say expenses, it is the operational cost that is paid to earn business revenues. In this page, makikita naman natin ang basic accounting equation, which is the asset is equal to liability plus owner's equity. Though, pwede din ito maging liabilities is equal to asset minus owner's equity, and owner's equity is equal to asset minus liability, which means it can be depends on the situation or in the transaction that had been happened. Example, Mr. Choi has liability of 100,000 and owner's equity of 300,000. So, ang sinasabi dito is si Mr. Choi daw ay may liability na 100,000 and owner's equity na 300,000. Which means, ang i-compute natin is liabilities plus owner's equity for us to be able to get the asset. It will be 100,000, which is the liability, and 300,000, which means the owner's equity. 100,000 plus 300,000 is equivalent of 400,000, which means Mr. Choi has an asset of 400,000. Second example. Mr. Choi has an asset of 400,000 and owner's equity of 300,000. So, ang hinahanap naman dito is yung liability ni Mr. Choi. It will be liability is equal to asset minus owner's equity. So, asset is equivalent of 400,000. Owner's equity is equivalent of 300,000. 400,000 minus 300,000 is equivalent of 100,000. So, ang liability ni Mr. Choi is 100,000. Last example, Mr. Choi has an asset of 400,000 and liability of 100,000, which means ang hinahanap dito is yung owner's equity. It will be owner's equity is equal to asset minus liability. So asset is equivalent of 400,000 and liability is equivalent of 100,000. So 400,000 minus 100,000 is equivalent of 300,000. So, Mr. Choi has an owner's equity of 300,000. And that is the discussion for the basic accounting equation. Next is the T account. Okay, so what is T account? T account is a visual presentation of accounting journal entries that are recorded by the company in its general ledger account in such a way that it resembles the shape of the alphabet T and depicts the credit balances graphically on the right side of the account and the debit balances on the left side of the account. And we all know that the T account is one of the most useful thing in accounting because it is the fundamental to our understanding in accounting, and it can be very helpful for us to be able to solve any accounting problem. As we can see in T account, ang account title ay palaging nasa itaas for us to be able to know kung ano yung maaapektuhan. Under the account titles is the debit and credit. Sabi nga, there is no debit without a credit. Okay, so what is debit? Debit increases the balance of asset, expense, or loss account and decreases the balance of liability, equity, revenue, or gain account. In this part, it says that the accounts with debit normal balance are asset, expense, and loss that includes the cash, accounts receivable, withdrawals, utilities expense, rent expense, salaries expense, and any other expense. In credit, it increases the balance of liability, equity, gain, or revenue account and decreases the balance of an asset, loss, or expense account. Sa credit naman ay opposite ng debit na kung saan nababawasan ng value ng asset which is the cash at sinasabi din dito na ang accounts na may mga normal balance ay ang liability, equity, accounts payable, and revenues. And that is the discussion for the T account. The next one is the double entry system. So what is the double entry system? Double entry refers to the bookkeeping method where two entries are made simultaneously into two different accounts, indicating a firm's cash inflow and outflow. Sa double entry na ito, meron itong purpose which is to tally the value in both accounts and balance the debit and credit side which can help the organization to assess their overall performance in a financial year. And always remember that the both value of the debit and credit are always the same because if not, there might be an error in recording. And now, let us answer the example. Paid utility bill for cash 5,000. The first thing that we should always do before recording a transaction using T account, we should always know kung ano nga ba yung naapektuhan. It is the asset, liability, or owner's equity. Dahil sinabi rito na nagbayad nga siya ng telephone bill for a cash ng 5,000, ang naapektuhan dito is yung utilities expense and cash. Utilities expense, why? Because telephone bill can be recorded under the utilities expense, which is utilities expense is under the owner's equity. And cash naman sa asset because sa pagbabayad nito ng 5,000. Ang 5,000, i-record natin siya sa utilities expense as a debit. Sa cash naman, i-record natin to as an credit since nabawasan nito ang cash nito dahil nagbayad ito. And that is the discussion for the double entry system. Now, let us proceed to the normal balance of accounts. So first, let us know what is the normal balance of accounts. Normal balance refers to the kind of balance that is considered normal or expected for each type of account. This concept is commonly used in the double entry method of accounting. First, ano nga ba yung ginagawa natin to increase the account? So kung ano ang gagawin natin to increase the account, yun yung normal balance niya. Now, as we can see sa asset, to increase the account, we debit. Kaya ang normal balance ng asset is debit. Sa liabilities naman, to increase the account, we credit. So ang normal balance nito ay credit. And sa equity, to increase the account, we also credit and ang normal balance din nito ay credit. Also the same techniques sa revenue and expenses.
And we should always remember na sa limang ito, dapat ang palaging normal balance niya is increase, whether it is debit or a credit.
So now, let us start recording a transaction using T accounts. In August 1, the owner, Danny Choi, invested funds amounted to 800,000 to start a business named Cafe Prince. So when starting a business, lagi naman na ganitong paraan lagi nagsisimula where the owner invests money. In this transaction, Mr. Choi invested 800,000 sa business niya. So the first thing na dapat natin gawin is to analyze nga yung problem. And kung ano nga ba yung naapektuhan, is it the asset, liabilities, or the equity? At dahil naglabas ng pera si Mr. Choi, naapektuhan din nito ang asset which is the cash. So dahil nadagdagan ng asset, i-record natin ng 800,000 sa cash, debit. Dahil nadagdagan din ang equity dahil may investment, i-record naman natin ng 800,000 sa capital sa credit. August 4, bought equipment on account with the cost of 200,000. TRS agreed to allow 50 days for Mr. Choi to pay the bill. Dito naman ay sinasabi pa lang na bought equipment on account pa lang siya. So, maapektuhan dito ang liabilities which is the accounts payable. Sa asset naman is yung equipment. We will record the amount of 200,000 under the equipment in debit dahil nadagdagan ng equipment ng business. At i-record naman natin ang 200,000 sa accounts payable in credit dahil nadagdagan ang babayaran ng company. In August 6, Mr. Choi paid the cash for toner, fax paper, bond paper, pens, folder, and other supplies that had the total cost of 20,000. Dito naman, both assets ay nag-decrease and nag-increase. Ang nag-increase dito ay ang supplies. We can say na nag-increase ito dahil sa pagbibili o pagdadagdag ng mga supplies sa business. And ang nag-decrease naman dito is yung cash dahil ang pinambayad natin para madagdagan ang ating supplies is yung cash. Kaya we need to decrease the cash. So, i-record natin ang 20,000 sa supplies sa debit at ang 20,000 naman sa cash sa credit. In August 9, Mr. Choi decided to pay 40,000 to TRS Incorporation to reduce the debts. Sa transaction na to noong August 9, he decided to pay 40,000 para mabawasan ng kanyang utang. So ano nga ba yung naapektuhan dito? Sa part na ito, both assets and liability decrease. We will record the 40,000 in accounts payable under the debit and we will record the 40,000 in cash in credit decrease also. And nabawasan yung kanyang cash na ibinayad niya sa kanyang pagkakautang. In August 12, Cafe Prince earned 80,000 of revenue from charge account clients. These clients are allowed 30 days to pay. So in this transaction, both assets and equity increase. Asset, ang naapektuhan nito is yung accounts receivable and sa equity naman is the fees revenue. So, we will record the 80,000 in accounts receivable in debit dahil makakatanggap si Mr. Choi ng 80,000 na revenue na charge galing sa clients. We will record the 80,000 in fees revenue in credit dahil madadagdagan ang kanyang income. In August 14, Cafe Prince hired an accountant and an accounting staff on August 1 to help the business. The firm paid in cash 30,000 in salaries for these employees. Sa transaction naman na ito, ang naapektuhan dito is yung asset and equity. Sa asset is yung cash and sa equity is yung salaries expense. We will record the 30,000 in cash in credit and it decreased because nabawasan yung cash natin dahil sa pinambayad natin na salaries expense sa employee. And we will record the 30,000 in salaries expense in debit.
And the debit increased dahil nadagdagan yung binayaran natin na expense.
In August 17, Cafe Prince received 30,000 from clients who had previously bought services on account. This cash was applied to their accounts. Dito naman is parehang naapektuhan ang assets, which is the cash and accounts receivable. Sa cash, we will record 30,000 in debit dahil sa pag-receive ng 30,000. Nadagdagan ang cash. We will record the 30,000 in accounts receivable in credit. In August 21, Cafe Prince earned a total of 210,000 in revenue from clients who had paid for accounting and bookkeeping services. Sa transaction na ito, masasabi natin na both assets and equity ay nag-decrease. Sa asset ay ang cash, sa equity fees revenue. We will record the 200,000 in cash sa debit dahil nadagdagan nito ang cash na to. At sa fees revenue din naman sa 210 dahil nadagdagan ng income ng business dahil sa natanggap na revenue sa client na nagbayad ng 210,000. In August 24, Cafe Prince received a 35,000 bill for the utilities that it had been used during the month. Cash was issued to pay the bill immediately. Dito naman masasabi natin na ang asset at equity ay parehas na naapektuhan. Sa asset, ang naapektuhan dito is yung cash, and sa equity, ang naapektuhan naman ay ang utilities expense. Dahil sinabi dito na ang bill ay nabayaran agad, si Mr. Choi ay walang pagkakautang, so wala ditong liability. So dahil nabayaran niya agad ang 35,000, ito ay i-credit natin sa cash at ito ay magdi-decrease dahil nabawasan ang cash ng business dahil sa pagbabayad ng utility expense. I-record naman natin ang 35,000 sa utilities expense dahil sa pagkakadagdag ng kanyang binayaran. On August 27, Cafe Prince paid a rent for the month of August. The lease contract Mr. Choi signed specified the monthly rent of 45,000. Dito naman is naapektuhan is yung assets and equity. Sa asset, naapektuhan dito yung cash, and sa equity naman is yung rent expense. Ang 45,000 is i-record natin sa cash, sa credit dahil nabawasan yung cash ng business, at i-record naman natin ang 45,000 sa rent expense sa debit dahil nadagdagan ang kanyang binayaran. For the last business transaction for the month of August, in August 31, Mr. Choi withdraw 200,000 in cash from the business for personal use. Sa transaction nito, ang naapektuhan is yung asset and the equity. Sa asset is yung cash and sa equity is yung withdrawal. And dahil sinabi dito na nag-withdraw ng 200,000 in cash si Mr. Choi, we will record the 200,000 in cash dahil nabawasan yung cash ng business. And we will record the 200,000 in Mr. Choi withdrawals in debit. And that's all for the discussion in the basic accounting equation, the T account, double entry system, normal balances of accounts, and recording transaction using T accounts. Again, I am Pia Elaine Mariano from Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, major in Financial Management.